Peter Dunne has made a very good point in a piece of work this week we should all read on how this whole thing has become a little bit Orwellian. It's being run by just a handful of people, too few people, and Parliament needs to be brought back to oversee operations. And Peter Dunne is with us. Very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike.
This all goes down to the state of emergency, right in its powers. Too much of it, too long.
That's right. We have a capacity under the legislation for a state of emergency to be declared for 7 days at a time. That empowers the Director of Civil Defence and Emergency Management, and in this instance working with the Director General of Health and the Commissioner of Police, to basically run the country. The rest are all bit players, the government of the day included. And I just think that with the momentous nature of the decisions that we're making and the crisis we're facing is far too narrow a focus, and it's far too big an imposition on our rights and freedoms in this country.
Doesn't the Bridges Committee solve that to a degree?
No, it doesn't, because that's really reviewing decisions that have been made. It's got no input into decisions that are about to be made. The Bridges Committee, for instance, would have had no role in determining what level 3 lockdown might look like, but it can decide after the event whether that was a good thing to do or not. This is an unprecedented crisis. You don't resolve it by sort of taking control right back into a tight little group at the centre that's effectively accountable to nobody, and then affecting the whole population and expecting us to meekly fall into line.
If you look at the polls, we have fallen meekly into line, and we love it, apparently.
Yeah, and that I find incredibly disturbing. I never thought I'd see in New Zealand where citizens liked to be encouraged and actively did snitch on each other, where you have competing opinions being expressed by epidemiologists and other health professionals, but those who criticise the prevailing norm are dismissed as sort of denigrating the national effort. We have a situation where the police are out there about educating people about how they should behave. This has got remarkable overtones of, as I said in the opinion piece, George Orwell's 1984. It's got remarkable overtones of our sort of stereotypical impression of what a totalitarian society looks like, and it's not New Zealand.
Do you think we're in a stupor, and it's only when the economic reality smacks us in the face in the middle of the year that we'll finally wake up?
I think possibly it's so. I think we're starting to see some signs now, and I think it's really interesting that a lot of the debate about what level 3 looks like is people starting to test how far they can push their boundaries. To date, we've been simply told this is the way it's going to be, and we've all meekly complied. And I think we've done pretty well for 4 weeks. I think you can't denigrate the response in terms of the fall in the number of cases. But the imposition on people's lifestyles, their freedoms, and their attitudes towards each other, I think is going to be a long-term cost, and we need to start moving out of that as much as we move out of the lockdown and the economic and other impositions.
As much as I agree with you, the difficulty with Parliament is it's a bit of a time waster at times, isn't it? I mean, what you're asking for in theory is good, but in reality is Parliament really the mechanism to do it efficiently?
Well, you can argue that, but I just go back to, Winston Churchill's great speeches during World War II weren't made to a press conference. They were made to Parliament. The momentous decisions about what to do weren't made sort of by a group of senior officials hidden away. They were made by the Parliament. I think it's the same principle. Yes, it's tedious, but then the democratic process is slow and tedious. That's why it's called democracy, because it's the voice of the people. Yeah. But if you cancel that out and just reserve power into a small group, two things happen. Firstly, they've got no sort of point of reference to question whether or not their decisions are reasonable. And second, in the longer term, very hard for that small group to give up power when things start to return to normal.
How would you have done it?
Well, I think firstly, I'd have made sure that Parliament was sitting, perhaps not the type of time it normally sits, because that's obviously impossible, but I would have, if I was the Prime Minister, for instance, the daily statements about the number of cases and what we're doing would have been made to Parliament, not to a press conference. And that would have then afforded the opportunity for the people's representatives to ask the questions, not for the media to just shout them at them. I'd have used Parliament to work more effectively in terms of devising solutions, testing some of the propositions that are put forward. For instance, the Treasury's scenarios for how bad things might be. But just like the Treasury's tablets of stone, there hasn't been any testing of those arguments as to whether they're valid or not. And there doesn't look likely to be. They'll either be accepted because the Minister of Finance agrees with some of them, or rejected because he doesn't. Now, that's fine up to a point, but let's just have some pushing of some boundaries. We've got a general overall strategy we're following, but I think the notion that only the select few know what's going on and can be trusted a dangerous one.
It's a very good point, Peter. Well done again. By the way, you of all people can answer this question. What are you doing with your hair, given the hairdresser's place?
I am just letting it do what it always does, its own thing.
Well, you're a lucky man. It looks good as it goes long. Nice to catch up with you.
Thanks, Mike.
Appreciate it. Peter Dunne, former MP, of course. Look up his work. It's always worth reading.